Hello, everyone. Welcome to English for You. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jiggling.
And we're back with the monster and his 3 stories. It's kind of an interesting story we're reading today. A young guy who's having a bit of trouble in his life. He's been getting some help from the sort of friendly neighborhood monster. Who stands outside his window at night telling him stories.
Yeah. I think that's actually a very good thing. I wish I had a monster around me.
I think once I stopped screaming after seeing the monster outside my window and he started to tell me his interesting stories, I would agree with you. It would be a nice thing.
Yeah.
But of course, first I would have to stop screaming, Monster! Anyway, so yesterday, the monster told a story about an evil prince who wanted to trick everyone to thinking a witch was a murderer. But the monster saved the day by rescuing the witch who wasn't evil. It was the prince who was evil. So that story kind of taught a message to the young man. So let's get into today's article and see what else we can learn from the monster and his interesting stories.
Reading. A Monster Calls.The second story was about a priest and a healer. The healer was smart, but he was an old man with a bad temper who was hard to get along with. He asked the priest to let him chop down a tree and use it for medicine. The priest refused, but then his daughters got sick. Suddenly, he changed his mind about the tree. He said he would give up all his beliefs if the healer would save his daughters.This time, the healer refused. All the time, my mother was getting sicker and sicker. The monster's third story was simple. There was a man who was invisible because people had gotten used to not noticing him. The monster made people see him again, but being seen isn't always good. The monster said it was time for my story. I told him about a nightmare I often had,one about holding on to my mother to stop her from falling. In the nightmare, it was hard to hold on, and I could feel her slipping away from me.
All right, so we jump right back into our story as we start today's part of the article. It says the second story was about a priest and a healer. Remember, the first story yesterday was about the prince and the witch. The second story for today is about a priest and a healer. What is a priest? A priest is basically a holy person, someone who probably works in a church or a temple, and they might lead the people of their community in worshiping and praying and having church services or temple ceremonies, and they'll probably also be an expert in some way on the religion, know all the answers to people's questions, and they basically act as the leader of a church or temple and the community. For example, the priest welcomed the worshipers into the church. So a typical Sunday morning at many churches around the world, the priest is kind of in charge, and he welcomes the worshipers to come and join the church service.Yeah,
所以这个 priest 就是牧师或神父，那在中文里面有分2个是不同宗教的叫法，所以你可以说 the criminal confessed his sins to the priest. That's what people usually do to the priest.
Yeah, sometimes people like to confess their sins. That's right.
所以我们文章第2个故事是有关于一个牧师跟一位信仰疗法的医术师，传统信仰疗法医术师。
All right. Of course, priests also do marriages, right, and funerals, all sorts of things, but involving churches and religions and temples and stuff like that. We also had a healer. Remember a healer? This is an old story going back probably a few hundred years. So basically, think of a healer as a doctor. It would have been someone who uses, medicine of some kind to help people when they're sick or having health problems. So the healer, as we continue, it says the healer was smart, but he was an old man with a bad temper who was hard to get along with. Okay, so he was a good doctor, but he was a grumpy doctor. He was not the kind of guy you want to make angry. He had a bad temper. What is your temper? It's kind of like your mood. It's your emotions. And we often talk about people having different tempers. You might have a good temper. That means nothing really bothers you. But if you have a bad temper, you might be the kind of person who gets angry and upset at even the smallest little thing, and you're always grumbling at people and shouting at people and, hey, you kids, stop making so much noise, and, that kind of thing. So let's read about another person with a bad temper, or, as we'll see in the article, a short temper. It says, if he doesn't have his coffee in the morning, Minnie's boss often has a short temper.
What does coffee have anything to do with having a bad temper?
Yeah, it might have a little bit to do with it. Depends how much coffee he needs to drink in the morning. A bad temper means you're angry.
Yeah.
You're in a bad mood. A short temper means you get angry quickly. You go from kind of happy or fine or normal to angry very, very quickly. Oh, we also had that phrase, to get along with. Remember, it said the healer was smart. He was a smart man, but he had a bad temper. So it was hard to get along with people, or for people to get along with him. If you get along with someone, you have a good relationship. You're friendly with them. You have a good time with them. You rarely argue or fight or anything like that.
OK， 所以我们知道说这个 healer 他其实是一个不好的脾气不太好，然后他也很难相处，可是他非常的聪明。那我们再讲一下 temper 这个字，老师刚刚提的非常的清楚，它就是脾气。那这边有出现一个片语，就是 get along with somebody， 就是与谁融洽相处或相处的意思。所以如果你暴怒了，你就可以说You lose your temper. 比如说 try not to lose your temper in public. It's super embarrassing. 所以呢 if you can't lose your temper, maybe you should keep your temper. 所以你可以说 How did you manage to keep your temper after knowing what he had done? 他做这种事你居然还不生气，到底怎么办到的啊？所以大家可以记下这个字。
All right, so anyways, back to the priest and the healer. It says that's the healer, he asked the priest to let him chop down a tree and use it for medicine. Okay, well, since he's a healer, I guess he needs things to make medicine from. This tree probably had a special wood or something, so he wants to chop down the tree. But first he has to ask the priest to let him do this. I guess maybe the tree is near the church or near the temple, so the healer doesn't own it. That's why he has to ask to chop it down. What is it to chop? It is to cut something, probably with a very strong sort of axe or knife or something like that, bringing it down quickly, and it kind of makes a loud noise when you cut through something. Then you're chopping it. We chop down trees, of course. Or here's another example. The firefighter used his axe to chop through the wooden door.
Okay.
If there's a fire, he won't be cutting through it carefully to make a very nice, pretty hole. He'll be trying to cut through it as fast and as powerfully as possible. That's why we would use the verb to chop and not to cut.
OK， 所以我们来看一下这里面的文法哦。所以这边出现的是呢 someone let or make have do something， 这个东西就是使役动词的用法，那其实就是指使或命令的意思。不过其实他们呢有一点点语义上的差异。我们先看一下 make 通常比较像是命令或迫使。Many public schools in Taiwan make students wear uniforms， 就是台湾的呢一些公立学校呢会让他们的学生穿制服，有一种 like you're trying to force someone to do something， 有一点是这种命令迫使的感觉了。那如果是 let， 它就是比较像允许。所以比如说这个里面这一个 priest， 你知道他就叫这个 healer 把这一个树，他问他可不可以砍树 ，so he asked the priest to let him chop down the tree， 所以代表我们后面放一个原形，代表是允许，或者是呢 Maggie's mom lets her watch TV after dinner。那我们再看一下 have， 如果是 have 的话呢，也比较有要求或交付的意思。比如说 Kelly had the waiter clean her table before she sat down， 或者 the company had cleaners wash all the windows in the office。那如果你要用 get 这一个字呢，它也是使役动词，也是说服或者是叫别人做事情。不过后面不太一样，它是要接 to be。比如说 Dad got Katie to walk the dog by telling her she could buy candy on the way。好，所以老师刚刚提到 chop 这个字呢，有劈或砍的意思。比如 chop something down， 把什么东西砍倒。所以老师刚刚有提到说，如果你要切鸡肉啊，我切肉，这些都可以是 chop up something. Can you chop up the chicken for me? I'm gonna need it for the soup. 所以呢，文章说呢，他家的牧师呢，就是要让他砍倒一棵树，因为他必须用药使用。
All right, so back to the article. The priest refused, but then his daughters got sick. Aha, that's an interesting twist in our story. So the healer wanted this tree. He wanted to chop down the tree. Apparently the priest said no. We see there the priest refused. That's to say no to someone when they offer or ask you something. But then the priest's daughters got sick. Someone is going to need a healer with good medicine now, right? So let's see if he changes his mind. But when he first got asked by the healer, the priest said no, he refused. When someone offers you something, one wants to do something for you, wants to give you something, and you don't want it, you can say no, right? It's perfectly okay to refuse someone if you don't want to do it or if you think it's not right to do. That is fine, but they offer and you say no, or no thank you, but thank you for offering. That's a polite way to refuse. For example, Billy refuses his friend's help even if he is in trouble. Wow, Billy sounds like he might be a little too proud to accept people's help. We all need help sometimes.
Yeah. 所以这边 refuse 就是有拒绝的意思。So you can say that to refuse to do something or to refuse something or someone's offer. 比如说 she refused to believe that her son was a junkie. 这个 junkie 就是 like a drug addict. 所以呢，就是他去拒绝去相信呢，他的儿子是一个有毒瘾的人。Every parent doesn't want to believe that their sons are bad, you know?
Or did bad things or something. Yeah, sure. I mean,
like,
even with your friends, you might refuse to believe that they did something so terrible. I can't believe that.
Yeah, 所以牧师就回绝了。不过后来他的女儿生病了，突然之间他就改变心意了，觉得好吧，那就来砍树吧。
Okay, but this priest, he is desperate. He really needs help. I guess his daughters are really quite sick and in danger because next it says that's the priest, he said he would give up all his beliefs if the healer would save his daughters. I'm not sure how that's going to get the healer really to help, but the priest is basically saying, I will stop working at the church. I will even say I don't believe in God. If only you will help my daughters. Basically, the priest is willing to give up everything that's important to him so that the healer will help him and help his daughters get better. This priest sounds, I guess we would say, very desperate. He will take any help, any answer, any sort of solution to his very scary problem.
Yeah, 所以他就跟这个医术师说呢，如果你可以治好我女儿，那我就会放弃我的信仰。
All right.
Well, but I don't think the healer is going to benefit from it.
I don't think so. I think what the healer wanted at the beginning was a simple thing. I just want the tree to make medicine to help lots of people. The priest said no, and so now the healer's not really in a good mood and doesn't really want to help the priest. Because it says this time the healer refused. The healer said, no, I'm not going to do it. I wanted your help before. You didn't want to help me, but now you really need my help, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to help you. Yeah. Was that right? Was that wrong? You can judge, but it's fair, I guess.
Yeah, 所以呢，这次艺术师也 refuse 回绝了，因为上次他没有帮他，那他这次就不想帮他了。
And then it says, all the time, my mother was getting sicker and sicker. So now we've jumped out of the story. Now we're back with the boy in his room. Remember, he's living with his grandmother because his mother is very sick. So as he's sort of trading these stories and sharing stories with the monster, remember, this boy in the story has a big problem, a sick mother. All the time they were doing this. When we use this expression all the time, we're kind of saying that this was still true. This was still going on when other things were happening, all right? For example, we're kind of showing that two things are taking place at the same time, maybe even in the same location, in the same place, but one thing continued on while other actions were happening at the same time.
OK， 所以这边的 all the time 就是与此同时的意思，那它当然也可以当一直的意思哦。所以这边意思说呢，在发生这些事情的时候，其实他的妈妈病得越来越重 ，Connor's mom.
Okay, so 2 stories down. Remember, the monster had 3 stories. Back in the article, the monster's 3rd story was simple. Okay, so it's a simple story. It's not complicated.
怪物的第三个故事呢，其实就是不复杂，非常的简单。
I think the first story was complicated, right? With the witch and the prince and stuff. We don't have a story like that. Let's read the simple 3rd story. It says, there was a man who was invisible because people had gotten used to not noticing him. Oh, that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
So this man was really not very interesting or important. A lot of people didn't really pay attention to him. And then, I guess after all that, he became invisible. Well, he certainly would feel invisible because no one notices him, and he had gotten used to this. When you're invisible, or when something is invisible, you can't see it. You should be able to see it, but now, because of magic or some kind of situation, you can't see it anymore. This is something that maybe just means kind of they're not really invisible. It's just something's changed or we're not paying attention or something like that. But you know, when Harry Potter puts on his magic cloak, his magic coat, he becomes invisible, right? You can't see him. He's there. He might talk. You might even be able to touch him, but you can't see him. For example, where did that mosquito go? It's like it has become invisible. Have you ever done that? You try to kill the mosquito, you miss it, and then you look around and it's just gone.
But it was a fly.
What happened?
It was even more disgusting.
I think it's magic.
Yeah,
it's not. It just went somewhere else. But to me, it's like I can't see it. It's
Maybe
invisible.
Your cat ate it. Maybe
that could be too.
Yeah. 所以我们看到 invisible 是隐形的，所以如果看得到呢 ，if you can see it， 那它其实就是 visible。好，所以这两个字是那个相反词。那我们再看一个 the beach was barely visible through the fog， 代表浓雾呢让我们几乎看不到这个海滩。那老师刚刚有提到这个片语就是 get used to doing something or get used to something， 代表习惯于做什么事情。比如说 it takes a little while to get used to the climate， 所以我们知道说有一个隐形的男人呢，因为大家都习惯忽略他了。It's like an outsider。Yes,
very, very much so.
Very sad.
So here's this poor, sad, probably kind of lonely, invisible man. He's not really invisible, but he feels he is. And then we read the monster made people see him again. So the monster made him visible again. People can see him, but being seen isn't always good. So maybe this man now has everyone paying attention to him. Everyone can see him. This kind of reminds me of people who kind of think, if I was famous, my life would be great. And then they become famous and suddenly they're like, I don't like being famous. Everyone wants to talk to me and get things from me and, stuff like that. So sometimes, if you think you're in a bad situation, be careful what you wish for, because if it comes true, you might find your new situation even worse.
Right. 所以这边说呢，怪物呢就变得让大家可以看到这个男人哦。不过他后来发现被看到并不总是一件好事。
All right, and then the monster said it was time for my story. Remember, the deal was the monster will tell the boy 3 stories. He has to tell the monster 1 more story.
所以怪物就說 OK 啊，我講完3個了 So it's your turn to tell your story.
That's right. And so the boy told him a story, a very kind of personal story, not sort of like a fairy tale type story, what the monster was telling him. This is a bit more of a personal story from the boy's life. It says, I told him about a nightmare I often had, one about holding on to my mother to stop her from falling. That sounds sad and scary, especially remember his mother is very sick and could possibly die. So you can kind of think that if he has a nightmare about holding on and maybe losing his mother, this is a nightmare kind of about being afraid of his mother dying and going away from him. What is a nightmare? It's a bad dream. It's a frightening, scary dream, the kind of dream you don't want to have, the kind of dream that's not fun, the kind of dream where you're running from things, or you feel in danger, you feel like everyone doesn't like you, or, this is not good. And then you wake up, and of course, and you're scared and sad, but then you're also like, that was only a nightmare, a bad dream.
所以 nightmare 就是噩梦，那也有出现一个 hold on to something or someone， 它就是紧抓住某人的意思。所以这个 Connor 呢，他就告诉这个怪物他常常做的噩梦，那他这个噩梦里面呢，他都要紧抓住他妈妈，所以他的妈妈才不会掉下去。
All right. In the nightmare, it says, it was hard to hold on, and I could feel her slipping away from me. Oh, that is sad. So in this nightmare, it's like his mother's maybe falling and he's trying to hold on to her fingers. And you can imagine in the movies, one hand is slipping away from the other and he's holding on by just the tips of his fingers and he's afraid he's going to let her fall or drop or disappear. He felt her slipping away from him. Of course, if you're holding someone's hand, they can slip away from you. Or if someone just leaves your life, if they die, if they move away, if you have a big fight and your friendship ends, they're also slipping away. But when we talk about slipping, we often talk about moving or falling in kind of a slow and sliding motion. You might slip on ice or a wet floor if you're walking on it or something like that. Here's an example sentence. Dave's jacket slipped off the back of the chair and fell on the ground. Okay, it kind of fell off in a kind of slow sliding way. That's how it fell off the chair.
所以这个 slip 就是滑走或滑落。那其实老师刚刚有提到哦，如果你今天地板有点滑或比较湿的话，你可能会滑倒。那就是 be careful not to slip. The floor is pretty slippery. 所以 slippery 就是很滑的意思。那如果你今天当溜走或巧巧的，其实也可以。比如说 knowing that her parents had fallen asleep, she slipped out of the bed. 她就是知道她爸爸妈妈睡着了，她就偷偷的从床上溜走了。那我们从一个片语常常用就是 slip through someone's fingers， 代表 you miss like a very good chance。所以比如说 don't let a chance like that slip through your fingers。所以文章中呢，就意思说在梦里面呢，这个 Connor 他很难抓住他妈妈，他就可以感受到妈妈要离他而去了。
All right, so that's the end of our story, but not the end of today's article. We do have our chat question to do before we totally wrap things up.
You chat.
All right, so we touched briefly on our chat question in the article. Remember Connor's dream about his mother slipping through his fingers, slipping away from him? That's the question. What do you think is the meaning of Connor's nightmare?
I think he probably knows that his mom is going to pass away. It's like in his consciousness, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead of having a dream about, being in the hospital and watching her be sick, he has this more sort of scary and dramatic dream about her actually slipping through his fingers, like he's trying to stop her from falling or something like that. Yeah, I guess when people go through, periods or experiences like that in their life, especially when it's not something that just happens, it kind of stretches out over a long time. It will affect your dreams. It will affect you, and you might have nightmares. The only thing I would say to Connor is that, well, if it does happen, if that sad thing of losing his mom does happen, I'm sure in some time he'll also have some dreams about seeing her again. And some of those dreams are not nightmares. Those can be wonderful, sweet, loving dreams. Sometimes after someone dies, you still dream about them, maybe months or even years later.
Yeah.
And that can kind of be a nice thing too. So not all dreams can be bad. We do have good dreams, and we hope you guys have lots of good dreams. And after you have those tonight, come on back tomorrow and join us because we have one more day with this article. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Vocabulary Review.
Priest. Priests usually speak and tell stories about God to people who are willing to listen. Temper. Jacob has a terrible temper. He'll shout at you when he's angry. Chop. Oscar used a sharp axe to chop down the tall tree. Refuse. Noah refused to go to bed, so his mom got angry with him. Invisible. The white rabbit was invisible against the snow until it started moving. Slip. The coffee cup slipped out of my hand and broke on the floor.
智慧小补帖
Nightmare.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000。 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net